So this episode, along with the Casagrandes episode, I was thinking on using the future tense episode in comparison to the Casagrandes episode, but after watching this episode, I can instantly tell into why people wanted me to compare White and Wan to Mexican Makeover. You see, the thing is, the reason why I prefer future tense over White and Wan is because it took itself a little bit more seriously when it comes to the characters not changing to pursue different things. And while it may have nothing to do with family traditions, it really feels like that Rita and Lin So were trying way too hard to take their parenting job seriously. While in comparison to Mexican Makeover, it really feels like that Rosa is literally the only character that takes her family seriously most of the time, and at the same time, whenever she's trying to do family traditions, it doesn't change the fact that everyone around her just isn't the same as her. Though granted, the development that she gets with the relationships involving the other characters does have interest when it comes to how she feels in scenarios, but at the same time, when it comes to family traditions, not so much. But let's talk about the plots of these two episodes. In White and Wan, Rita promises her family to go to John Wan's French mix buffet if they become a perfect family in front of Jesse Hiller for the parenting advice column for Rita. And in all honesty, considering that this is the episode where the siblings are dysfunctional, it sums up a lot onto why I don't take them seriously at times. But considering that this is all about Rita, it really shows that Rita really wants a job badly in order to make things easier for herself. But considering that this is the world of the Loud House, it really feels like that the down-to-earth elements in this, right before the fantasy elements come into play. I felt like that this episode was originally an earlier season episode, mainly from seasons 1 or 2. But considering that they're doing it here, maybe it's mainly the fact that Lori is going to college the following season. So they literally did what they could in order to make this episode focusing on Rita's character. In Mexican Makeover, with Rosa's mother coming to visit, she was praising Rosa for carrying the family traditions, but at the same time, it's not really the case, considering that the rest of the Casagrandes don't really carry the family traditions. And for me personally, what makes this episode interesting to me is the fact that Ryan's scenario in this is the fact that she has to carry the tradition. In Misstep, she has to take the tradition of dancing with Rita, but in this, everyone needs to carry the Mexican tradition, considering that they're representing Mexico. Though granted, it's Mexican culture, but it's the same thing. If I'm gonna be honest, in comparison to the siblings wearing matching uniforms, I'm gonna say that it's somewhat simpler in comparison to the Casagrandes doing their own tradition involving Mexican culture. Though it's really saying something, considering that the Casagrandes have to do a lot more than just being a perfect family by doing family traditions. Believe me when I say this, I would probably be in a position with the Loud siblings than anything in the Casagrandes episode. So that's where the comparisons comes to an end. Well, aside from the endings, but I'm gonna get to those later. If I'm gonna be really honest with you, when it comes to Rita's situation in White and Wan, I understand that she's just trying to be a better character, and she just wants to be a better mother towards the Loud siblings, but everyone else in Royal Woods. So, for me personally, the plus side of this is that if Rita needs to impress other people in Royal Woods, maybe this is the way for her to do it. In comparison to the Casagrandes episodes involving Rosa and the others, it's a lot more harder. Since that she isn't impressing anyone in town when it comes to a parenting column, it really feels like that she really wants to improve the family tradition, considering that the sad reality is that she is carrying the family tradition and Ryan's mother and father aren't in this episode. I'm gonna be really honest with you, the fact that Rosa is being the much more mother figure in comparison to Maria is really saying something. And since that she only told the family in the middle of the episode while Rita told her family in the beginning of her episode, it really feels like that Rosa is being handicapped in the same ways as Lincoln in other scenarios, but in this, she's being handicapped in a proper way, considering that everyone around her just isn't interested into Mexican traditions in the same ways as her and her mother. And considering that in Rita, she is mostly being handicapped due to the Loud siblings being out of control for the sake of plot, this is where I lead to my biggest problem with the Loud House episode. While the Loud siblings are not unlikable, it doesn't change the fact that they're being portrayed as plot devices for Rita, and then for me personally, it just really feels like that after the development that we've seen, and mainly the fact that we've seen bad episodes along the way, it really feels like that we shouldn't be trying to take this family as an improving family when it comes to their relationships with each other. Because in all honesty, this is literally the beginning of the end, and this is before we get into seasons 5. Believe me, I understand that Rita is the main character, I get that, but at the same time, when you make the Loud siblings be portrayed like this and not playing a major factor in this episode, it just really makes the ending of this really predictable. Granted, it was bound to happen, but at the same time, too predictable. And for me personally, it's just really a shame that Rita has to carry this episode while the siblings themselves are just plot devices for Rita. Though granted, they're being really good in order to go to John Juan's French mixed buffet that Rita promised. But at the same time, there would have been a lot more to the characters if they actually did a lot more in this episode. Granted, they don't have to be main characters, but at the same time, willing to help out the mother. I mean, Our Amazing Mother song would have been a lot more better if the characters were taking her situation seriously, mainly Rita's situation. And while I understand that they can't be able to pursue different things, like in future tense where they're being placed in those predicaments due to Rita and Lynn, I really felt like that they would have come clean onto helping out Rita in order to make things better for her. But considering that the families, mainly the parents, are really dysfunctional in this show, it really feels like that the families and parents in this aren't never perfect. And believe me, the perfect family from future tense I was praising when I had the consideration of comparing that to Mexican Makeover, but thinking about it now, it really feels like that it would probably be one terrible time to be in that family of what happens behind closed doors. But I'm overthinking it. In Mexican Makeover, when it comes to the second half of the episode, it sums up a lot onto why Future Tense has those elements in this. Like, the similarities that this episode has in Future Tense is the fact that the characters, while not being in the same scenarios as the Loud siblings in that episode, were taking the situation seriously on carrying the Mexican tradition. Though granted, they're just showing it in front of Rosa's mother, they're at least trying to make things right for Rosa and her mother. And considering that this is a lot more complicated on how they're trying to impress Rosa's mother, believe me when I say this, if the Loud siblings did the same thing in Right and Wrong, they will probably make it a little bit more easier, since that there are less going on in that episode in comparison to this. And to be perfectly real with you, just witnessing Rita impersonating as Flip's sister, if Flip ever had a sister, is clever, but at the same time, it's honestly devastating to think that she's carrying the entire episode on her own, which is somewhat impressive, but at the same time still sad nonetheless. And for the record, when they impersonate as Flip's sisters in the same way as Rita, it didn't convince me at all, since that this is happening towards the end, and for me personally, it really feels like it's rushed writing involving the loud siblings in this episode. While the ending of this episode, it just sums up a lot onto how the parents in this show can't be able to be a perfect parent. And yeah, I understand that they're just trying to give Rita a good ending. It just doesn't change the fact that it's still too predictable. Like, if the story was better executed, this would still be predictable, but at the same time, it would probably make the reveal a lot more different and a lot more better. I'm just saying. Like, White and Wan just feels like an episode involving Rita, but it's not trying too hard on just trying to have the loud siblings being respectful towards the mother for the sake of just trying to make her a better parent. But judging of how Rita is developed before and after this episode, it really feels like that this episode involving parenting columns aren't really important, knowing full well that no one will witness it unless Rita is the main character in all this. And to tell you the truth, what I stated involving the ending of White and Wan is exactly how the ending of Mexican Makeover is played out. Believe me when I say this, is that it made me appreciate of how the Casagrandes aren't perfect while trying their best to perform a Mexican tradition that Rosa's mother has been expecting ever since she arrived at the apartment. If you ask me, the ending of Future Tense is better than the ending in this, but at the same time, in comparison to Ryan Wan, it made me appreciate of how that this episode is down to earth enough to make me convinced that it's trying to make the Casagrandes a dysfunctional family, but at the same time, not a complete close family on preparing everything, since that they're not accustomed to Mexican traditions, unlike Rosa and her mother. For me personally, even though that what the loud siblings did in order to impress Jesse Hiller in White and Wan is a lot more simpler in comparison to this, it doesn't change the fact that the difficulty that the Casagrandes went through makes this the superior episode over the Loud House episode. If only that White and Wan had better execution, it would make me convinced that it's a better episode than Future Tense. But believe me when I say this, if I did compare Future Tense towards Mexican Makeover, which I won't thanks to this episode being the replacement, I would probably delve deeper when it comes to the parents' situation in the Loud House episode, while seeing the differences in Mexican Makeover. And while there are differences in Mexican Makeover over White and Wan, I can guarantee you, Rita and Lynn were trying a lot more in comparison to this, knowing full well that there are different advantages in Future Tense. While the advantages in Mexican Makeover is mainly just trying to get into the Mexican culture. Well, it may not be the case for people who are not Mexican, but when it comes to Ryan and the others being Mexican, believe me when I say this, there's going to be a lot of comparisons or differences on just trying to treat your siblings right, all the while just throwing traditions involving different cultures. But that would probably be a complicated comparison video if I ever did so, but since I'm doing this, it's either for the best or mainly for the worst. But I'm only doing this since that some people online requested me to do a video like this. I'm giving White and Wan a 6 out of 10, while Mexican Makeover gets an 8 out of 10.